So thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Camille Bellet. I work as a researcher at the University of Liverpool in the Institute of Infection and Global Health. My background is in veterinary sciences, epidemiology and public health, and I'm currently specializing in sociology, social sciences, and more specifically on economics and the sociology of science and technology. So, of course, first of all, I would like to thank Isabelle and Marie-Hélène for the invitation to be with you today as part of a member of the SAPHIR project, and for thinking of me while preparing this workshop, and to both the PARAGONE H2020 and the Veterinary Vaccinology Network UK. So what I'm going to talk about today is part of a research that we are currently conducting with Professor Jonathan Rushton here in the room. And I would like to take the opportunity to share with you today some reflections we have on the history of vaccine and the implications for research and animal health policy. This is work in progress, but will hopefully give a chance and to have an overview of the kinds of research questions we are interested in. And of course, it would be great if we could discuss it a bit further after this talk. So in this presentation, this will quite change from the two previous presentations. I will start by giving a brief overview of the history of vaccines, and which in many aspects reveals first the inextricable link that exists between human and animal vaccines, and also the social, economic and political aspects of veterinary vaccine development. And I will then present some of the concepts and approaches that have been used in the social sciences to put veterinary vaccines into context, and providing, of course, some concrete illustration. And then I shall come back to the role of sciences in influencing a way veterinary vaccines are currently developed. I will examine the social representations of impacts in academic circles. And finally, I will discuss the implication for the future of vaccine research and animal health policy. So, veterinary and human vaccines have a close scientific history, which began with the very creation of the concept of vaccine. Despite their inextricable link, however, it has become quite commonplace to differentiate the two technologies, delimiting in some way, beyond the purely material nature of vaccine, a boundary between two health sciences from which vaccine emerge. And as we will see, is partly driven by different values, concerns, and perhaps political interests and power relationship between these two sciences. So this might be familiar to a lot of you, but of course I couldn't talk about vaccine development without coming back a bit to history, and without mentioning the first starts of vaccine and smallpox vaccine. Smallpox is a disease that is known since prehistory. From Northeast Africa, it emerged around 10,000 before Christ, and the disease spread to India by means of ancient Egyptian merchants. In China, the disease has been described since 1100 before Christ. And in India is also mentioned in ancient Sanskrit. The disease spread to Europe between the 15th and the 17th century, and causing regular epidemics and clearly affecting the development of Western civilization. The disease continued to spread during the colonization time, and actually one of the main concern of the disease was that actually the fatality rate was between 20 and 60%, and people that were surviving from the disease remain with disfiguring scars, and also could be blind. And it was common knowledge that actually people surviving from smallpox would be resistant, immune to smallpox. There was many herbal remedies that existed at that time, or cold treatment, special cloth to treat the disease. However, the most successful remedies remain what we call the inoculation or violation, which consisted in inoculating to a healthy subject some infected matter of a pustule from someone infected. And although this practice was widely used in China, in India, in Africa, in Middle East, this is only in the 18th century that actually this practice started to emerge in Europe. And this is partly due to the continued effort of one single lady, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, which made this procedure gain general acceptance in the UK. In fact, the death of European princes at that time gave further impetus for the integration of this practice, and the technique was also used to protect the military forces at that time. Yet, in the countryside, there had been a long-standing common belief that people who had been, that dairymaids were protected from smallpox. And drawing on the technique of violation, Edward Jenner, Englishman, investigated this assumption a bit further. What he did, he inoculated an 8-year-old boy using matter from end lesions of a dairymaid infected with cowpox. And after a few days of recovery, he inoculated again the young boy, but this time with smallpox. And what he found is that the young boy was protected and didn't show any sign of the infection. And he concluded that protection was complete. And actually, this is how the vaccine concept emerged. As the name itself testified, the word vaccine comes from vaccinus, which in Latin means from cows. And Jenner's ideas was firstly really rejected by the medical society, but it slowly finally spread to England and then to European nations for some of the reasons I mentioned before, and progressively replaced violation. When Jenner developed his idea, he used fresh cowpox from the lesions of a local dairymaid. However, according to historical records, the pharmaceutical industry, if we may call it this way, at that time, used interchangeably strains from cowpox and horsepox to produce the vaccine. And in this sense, what I want to highlight here is the importance of animals in the production of this first vaccine, a human vaccine. So I do not have time to come back to the entire history of vaccine sciences, but as you are all aware, veterinary vaccines have for long served as a model and complement for human vaccine development. When Louis Pasteur found the means to attenuate organisms in the laboratory, he used agents such as the fowl cholera or rabies in dogs and rabbits. Later in the 19th century, The principle of chemical inactivation was developed using a salmonella strain causing disease in pigs. This work led eventually to vaccines against typhoid, plague, cholera, and subsequently pertussis, all based on inactivated whole bacilli. And inactivated vaccines also against infections by anaerobic bacteria such as Clostridium were also the first inactivated vaccines in the developed in veterinary medicine. And this without, of course, forgetting TB based on Mycobacterium bovis, and the fact that also the first vaccine ever developed to prevent virus-induced cancer was developed with the Marek vaccine in poultry. So this was about the inextricable link between human and animal. Now, coming back to the social, economic, political context, we can see by the little history I recall briefly of smallpox vaccine development, how the development of this vaccine was situated within wider social, economic, and political processes. We observed how politics and power initiated the process of violation in Europe and the colonies. We clearly observe different levels of inequality, first between nations, Europe versus the colonies, second between genders and social classes, Lady Montaigu versus Edouard Jenner, the royal family, the army versus the low classes and the veterinarian, the rural versus the urban. And all these factors triggered and shaped the development and the narratives around this first vaccine, which quite overlooked in a way key actors and places who actually had a crucial role in the development of this first vaccine. And this is really a point to bear in mind when examining the development of vaccine. And the development of the most ambitious and strategic vaccine has often been the subject of one single grand narrative. And this is why I have put this image of Jenner, the conqueror of smallpox, given all what I have said before with the history facts. And actually, this one single grand narrative has often been one where rich and technologically advanced nations fight to improve the health and condition of the poorest, allowing then this poorest nation to achieve a sustainable development. To give an example, so when the eradication of rinderpest was proclaimed in 2011, only 37 years after the eradication of smallpox, the recognition of Western nations as initiators and drivers for the huge success of rinderpest eradication was unanimous. Although, of course, one must recognize the importance of this achievement, such framing gives quite less attention to the fact that these nations had played a critical role for some time in the spreading and maintenance of rinderpest. In Europe, the disease was a major plague in cattle until the end of the 19th century, when it was eliminated. And on the other hand, the disease was introduced and spread in Africa by the multiple Western military operations, first at the colonial time, and then during the First and the Second World War. When the disease was reintroduced in Belgium because of cattle trade in 1920s, the simple application of sanitary measures helped to control, contain, and eliminate the disease. Yet, of course, such a strategy was impossible to apply in an African context, with less regulated trade, widespread of the disease in wildlife, and prohibitive costs of implementation. At that time, rinderpest also seemed to be a very good candidate to support the continued development of the Western vaccine industry. It has huge similarities with smallpox virus, and this raised hopes for its eradication. And actually, the veterinary profession were keen to lead the way in this eradication. So, quoting one important social scientist, Sheila Jezanoff, in her work about new modernities, the instrumental uses of science and technology directed towards visible results offer concrete and measurable performance indicator. And this can in turn legitimize the practice and increase the power and respect of certain actors and organizations. From this, ultimately, the embedding of the technology can face two different situations. The first one, where the success of a technology, rinderpest vaccine, stabilizes, strengthens, and even integrate the organizational culture of a particular groups of actors in the public space. At the time of the creation of the OIE, many players and key actors were part of the elite of the veterinary profession, and also came from the Pasteurian tradition, vaccination tradition of the time. And the OIE was a result of a desire to collectively fight and protect nations against certain animal diseases that were considered to be important barrier for economic and economic trade and nations' development. And the OIE's effort has led to a real professionalization dominated by a veterinary profession in certain localities and the institutionalization of human health at a global level. Now, another situation can also emerge where a technology implemented in a country, such as in Brazil, and FMD vaccination, has completely dictated the way animal health services are functioning and organized, which in the case of Brazil, because of the new free status of FMD with vaccination, re-question actually the whole organization of the services. As we all know, the vaccine sector is not solely a market in its economic sense, where prices govern the interaction between supply and demand. Vaccines are a particular type of service, you all know that aims to guarantee the health of human beings, and actually human and non-human animals, both at an individual level, of course, but also at a public health level. And as a result, this means that a wide range of actors and organizations are involved in the field of vaccine, such as industries here, governmental and regulating organizations, both focusing on different species and both at national, regional, or international levels, NGOs, academic and research institutes, organization and of public-private partnerships, and independent. To mention just a few, of course. The slide would have been much bigger and quite impossible to make. And since the discovery of the first vaccine in the 1800s, the vaccine industry has profoundly changed from local to national vaccine fields to finally a much more global, international, diversified field. So knowing when and how to deploy a vaccine became more and more complex, with a particular need for consultation and logistic negotiation between different stakeholders with different values and interests. And in this sense, the drivers and incentive for vaccine development became part of a larger political picture. Coming back again to history, because I believe history allows us to understand quite a lot of things. If we look at the first development of vaccine, they were primarily at the service of armies and for the protection of colonizers, both in human and animal fields. Vaccine became then an important tool for economic growth and resilience of Western population in the era of industrialization and urbanization. It's not because I'm working in Liverpool, but here are some images from Liverpool and UK, but I could obviously have found other similar pictures from France, US, Belgium, and so forth. And actually, the example of vaccine success are manifest. And many diseases that historically were causing a lot of damages, impeding development, are no longer considered as a threat and problem in developed countries. Yet the same cannot be said for developing countries and also livestock production systems, where we have more and more animals reared in quite little space for always a growing, an overgrowing market with long distance to travel and so forth. Now, coming back again a bit to history, if we consider the various views surrounding vaccine development, although considered as one of the major achievements of the history of health and public health, opposition to vaccines has also accompanied the development of vaccine itself. And the reason for that have varied between fear of adverse reaction, suspicion, mistrust in medicine, but also religious and cultural barriers, and finally a sense of intrusion in the private life, and also a certain political authoritarianism. Here my French roots are coming in the front. And this controversy regarding the benefits of vaccination draws attention to the inequalities that may exist between societies and actors in terms of the capacities to be heard or represented, and is really critical to consider at the time of developing vaccines and also thinking of new vaccine policy. Vaccines are not developed in a moral neutral space, but are conceived and deployed within particular configuration of wealth and authority, where everyone can, as I mentioned, protest, express. And in a very interesting studies, actually I realize this slide is quite French, but in a very interesting studies from Delphine Berda. She's an historian, and she studied the tuberculosis, vaccination against tuberculosis in France between the 1920s and the 1960s. And what Delphine shows is how the use of TB vaccine was a social construction shaped by different issues at stake. the affirmation of the veterinarian profession, the defense of a French meat market, and also the expansion of various political ends, such as the one from the Institut Pasteur. Taking another example, now that of FMD, foot and mouth disease, this disease has always preoccupied farmers, probably since antiquity. Whether in Asia, Africa, or Europe, breeders practice the method of aphthization, quite similar to that of variolation, to protect their animals. And in the 20th century, processes of industrialization, expansion of livestock trade, and creation of vaccines that were increasingly effective, safe, but also and convenient in terms of actually the differential diagnosis, but also the storage, have gradually made of vaccine the answer to control foot and mouth disease, and slowly made of vaccination an official regulator of countries' access to increasingly complex and global markets. So depending on your status of FMD vaccination, doors could be open or closed. Yet the regulation of FMD and the operationalization are not the same for all and cannot be afforded by all, reinforcing and potentially maintaining the cleavage that can exist between more and less developed countries, more and less powerful actors. So now, as I explained it, there are a lot of political, socio-economic issues at stake, some controversies around. And now I would like to talk about also crises related to vaccines. So although considered as incredibly beneficial, there has been some crisis surrounding vaccine development and implementation. For instance, in the 90s, reversion to virulence of vaccine was responsible for major rinderpest outbreaks in many countries. In 2007, a strain of FMD virus contained in 2 laboratories at Purbeck was also released, causing an FMD outbreak only 6 years after the dramatic crisis experienced by the country. And finally, a more recent example where a link was established between the use of BVD pressure vaccine and the increasing number of cases of hemorrhagic diseases in newborn calves. I do not intend, of course, here to take any position of the different crises mentioned. But I just want to highlight the vulnerabilities of vaccine technologies and the resulting responsibilities that vaccine developers, decision makers, but also end users have. And the science and technology has brought hope for liberation of disease, hunger, poverty, but their implementation, their development first, and their implementation can still remain challenging, especially for those without the capacity to guard against error or accident. And this illustrates distinct social and political issues of vaccine development. And of particular importance here, again, is the issue of engagement with the different actors potentially experiencing potential impacts of new vaccine development and intervention policies. And engagement of these actors in the design and our research. So now I would like to come back, well, not to come back, to go slowly to sciences, research, what we are doing. As I highlighted earlier, the biomedical sciences have always played a crucial and influencing role in vaccine development, including in regulation and policy. To give an example, already in the 1930s, in France, Calmette et Guérin, in order to answer the worries related to the effects of BCG vaccination in children, made of cows a model to allow them to get some more data to prove that actually these concerns were not concerns. And they made also of vaccination a constituent of vaccine policies against TB in France at that time. Importantly, so as stated by the WHO, the traditional expanded program on immunization vaccines are considered to be among the most efficient uses of scarce healthcare. Yet, one point to underline here is that the common point of approaches for the economic analysis today of vaccination policy is the search for simple, harmonized, and practical forms of explanation and theories of diseases, human behavior, and rationality, which actually can in turn lead to the establishment of policy instruments that promote particular vaccines and vaccination programs. So with prediction numbers, control, and a care for generalization, these disciplinary, and I'm saying that because reading the WHO program, one of the first line was that economists and health service researchers were the target of the manual. Yet I wonder, what about the other actors? Where are they? And these disciplinary and linear frameworks, in a way, do not leave space for ambiguity, variability, and uncertainty. The way it's processed is quite straightforward. At the same time, they also widen the power divide that exists between what Sheila Jasanoff has called the hard sciences and the soft humanities. Yet, the use of social and interpretative research, such as historical analysis, ethnographical analysis, can help us, researchers, to explore what is unsaid in the development and use of vaccines. It helps to reveal the hidden, taken for granted work of some communities which work towards, at the end, the development of much more sustainable, responsible, and equitable vaccine choices and policy. So here I come slowly to the way we assess situations. The way scientists frame animal disease problems has implication for how impacts are defined, and in turn how policy interventions are dictated. And this framework here comes from the engineer sciences. However, I could have easily find the same type of approaches from the quantitative animal health sciences. Coming from epidemiologic background, I can say it, where actually we have quite a rigid framework of yes and no answer, allowing to go from one step to the other. But then we could question, what about a maybe? And what if the framework wouldn't actually include a situation that was not here to define the model? So what I would like to highlight here and to just report is the work that some sociologists have done about research and sciences. They have explored how research design is shaped by the researcher's values and concerns, and how this in terms can shape the object of studies. So the way we define our question, the assumption we have at start, that highlight or reflect a particular vision of the world we have, dictate the way the model will be constructed, and in a consequence, the way the result will come, and what would be the result. So importantly, to challenge this is crucial. And method chosen, so by scientists and used to assess a given research question, such as the benefit of a vaccine intervention, are laden, as I said, with values and judgments that reflect different contexts of the subject, different places where scientists are working, different knowledge they have from their experience, and from the exchanges they might have had with the research community. Scientists exchange ideas, and they do negotiate, and they do have trade-off. And this is part of the processes of quantification. Now, this is not to say this is completely bad. We need to discuss, we need to share, we need to question our way. However, what is important here is that if these assumptions or questions are untested or challenged, it can lead to possible erroneous assumptions about natural and social phenomena, and therefore lead to some policy intervention that wouldn't be accurate and appropriate. So importantly, what is most to blame here is not the incapacities, because we are all limited. However, it is the persistent and unreflective faith in imperfect and judgment-laden models that dominate the research landscape, supposed to lead to the progress. So the way we should work, in a way, and what we discuss here, is the importance of challenging what we think we know. I will take just an example of a research we have been conducted. These are preliminary results, and it's work in progress. And it's part of the SAPHIR project. And here we wished to examine the academic representations of impact. What do we think is important to do for research? And how do we consider impact assessment? What does that mean in animal health research? And we did this by focusing on 3 complexes of endemic livestock diseases in Europe. So the bovine and porcine respiratory disease complexes, accounting for 4 different pathogens, and the poultry enteric disease complex. And what we wanted to do is to examine this representation of impact and impact assessment by articulating it with the importance of the disease and the production systems of the places where the research had been done. And what I want to highlight here, so we did a critical literature review based on different search terms: impact, impact assessment, Europe, and also the different pathogens of the disease complex involved. And we collected 280 papers. And on these, so of course, one important thing I should note is we used one literature review search software, Web of Science, which also can bias results. But what we found there is that on the 280 papers we collected, talking about impact and impact assessment, only 8%, 22 papers, did a real impact assessment. And the way researchers used impact was more as an advocacy for the research that they were later developing than a real impact assessment. And actually, most of the papers related to the development of new technologies, whether diagnostic tools, vaccines, new feed, and new drugs. And this is, again, crucial to observe and to understand. It is crucial to understand in which context we are working also. What are the pressure? I can discuss this a bit further later if you are interested. But some other observation just highlight the fact that researchers are also working in a specific context where they are asked to provide research in some ways, which we need to examine if we want to work towards sustainability and actually good research. Now, exploring the questions and the reasons behind a simplification of scientific interpretation can foster richer conceptions of vaccine development and build sustainable common future. And this is why we are here today, to try to think how we can make science better and our work more useful. And our aims is to restore the plurality. Are we seeing white birds here or black birds, or actually both? And while restoring the plurality of meanings and provide alternative visions based on less reductionist readings of the human and non-human animal conditions and their values in the society, we will move forward. And of course, this will not come easily to many institutions of governance. Yet, we are currently initiating a new project around the global burden of animal diseases. This is supported by the Foundation of Bill and Melinda Gates and led by Jonathan. And the idea is, again, to sit and to reflect on our way of researching, developing, framing questions, and what we need after having isolated perhaps the good questions, if there are any, isolate what we need to answer this question in terms of method and also data. And with that, I would like to finish quoting Shela Jasanoff again, and saying that the centrality of vaccine development for sustainable future will only be justifiable if it does not rely on privileged knowledge, if it fosters inclusion and engagement, predictive capability, and unique right to formulate scenarios for the future. Thank you.
That's for, yeah.
Give you a break. Interesting. So this analysis, I mean, we all want to know what vaccines we should make. Actually, do we want to know what vaccines we should make? Surely this should be framed in what, oh, can you hear? Is that all right? Okay, good. Thanks, Andy. I suppose I started by saying this is helping us support which vaccines we should make. But is that really the question? Is what control procedures we should implement to control these diseases, and vaccines may be a small part of that, or may not even be part of that. So I think you could widen your question, but where I was actually going to get to is there's the idea of this analysis of all the factors that you had on your slide of the hard science and the social science. But I know from talking to a lot of colleagues in industry, I mean, industry do this all the time. I mean, how much, because it's absolutely crucial to them to have something that's going to sell and be effective and all of those things. So how much are you intending to engage with people in industry, and how easy will that be? Because that information may be confidential. That's the question, really. It's a lot of this work's being done in industry, and how are you going to balance what you're doing with what's going on in other places?
So first I would like to comment on your point about vaccines and how we're looking at the good issues. We know vaccines are good, it's more about implementation. Well, we need to know if the disease challenges we are facing or we are focusing on at the moment are the real challenges and the real disease we need to focus on. This is important. This is part of the process to rethink our prioritization of problems on which vaccine development rely. So this is the first point. In terms of the partnership, of course, there is a critical need to engage with the industry, and we are currently engaging. Well, I can see Jonathan moving the microphone, so you might wish to answer. But
yeah, just to answer you that, Brian. I mean, we've had quite careful discussions with a number of different people in this area. And last week we had a presentation which I think Damo led the talk on coccidiosis, where we're very interested in what we were doing in that particular space with regards to impact. We've had discussions with Elanco, we're talking to Bettergrow and CP in Asia. I recognise there are difficulties with regards engaging the private sector in this space, but the reality is probably 2/3, maybe 80% of all the animals are managed by big companies that are actually collecting data which we don't have access to, and understanding impact requires us to sort of try and engage with those people and understand how we can share data. And I think it's actually a core aspect of what we're trying to achieve here. So rather than having estimates just based on small scale surveys, actually trying to rely on some data that's actually regularly collected on health status and understanding exactly what people are trying to achieve in that space is, I think, critical in terms of taking this forward. It's a massive challenge, I'm not saying it isn't, but the alternative is that we keep stumbling along with the way we're going, when in fact human health is actually making quite big advances with its own programme through the burden of human diseases that continues to grow and actually evolve in terms of impact on human health.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Andy Peters, Edinburgh. I'll be speaking this afternoon about regulation of vaccines, vaccine development. And your talk, very interesting, thank you very much. It was great, but it impinges on a number of things that I may say this afternoon. But a couple of observations. First, I should probably confess that I was actually head of the department that developed the Pregshaw BVD when I was in industry. And of course, that problem was not foreseen at all. Why wasn't it foreseen? It was probably statistics, actually. It was probably a matter of power calculations or what was possible in terms of the resourcing at that time and what was necessary to actually get through the regulatory requirements. It obviously emerged later when the vaccine was on the market and larger numbers of animals were actually vaccinated. And the appropriate thing happened, actually. It was referred to the regulatory authorities. The regulatory authorities took a view, and I can't remember the exact sequence of events because it was long after I'd left the company, but eventually the product was removed from the market. So there are, what I'm trying to say is there are safeguards, But isn't it a question really of the Donald Rumsfeld syndrome? You know, there are a lot of unknown unknowns here. And society does tend to react, in my view, to these issues as and when they arise, and tries to build in additional safeguards. And for example, in the EU now we have the precautionary principle, which has been talked a lot about over the years. So we can't know everything, but I think most people I know have a will to kind of understand and protect the public. And so eventually my sense is that these things gradually evolve into a more effective regulatory and socially acceptable process.
I agree with what you're saying, although I would say also that we might not know also things because our approaches to understand things are not complete. And I think here I want to highlight the importance of overpassing discipline's barriers. It's very difficult to go into other fields and to learn about other knowledge. However, different angles and perspectives can really foster the discussion and make that actually we realize we didn't ask the right question. And so in this sense we could anticipate perhaps a bit more. The idea is not to control everything, because I think it's vain. We will never control everything. But if in our research we could start not only talk about interdisciplinarity, but really applying it, and more than interdisciplinarity, if we could go to transdisciplinarity, where we would engage with private sector industries, but also independents, the publics, this could help anticipate some crisis. And there has some research that has observed it. Didn't allow to change the crisis situation, but there had been some anthropological studies working in Africa, conducted in Africa, that had quite understood the way people were living, acting, and actually which allowed to uncover the fact that the implementation measures at the time of Ebola were not appropriate one. And if these kind of studies would have been in place before, of course they are not dealing with numbers, but still they are very instructive in the way we can guide policy.
I have two questions actually. The first one is, is your objective to offer guidelines to maybe react better and quicker? Because, for instance, right now we are starting to receive a lot of mail from our hierarchy to get mobilized against the African swine fever virus emergency. So are you involved in this global picture when we are facing an emergency and we are asked to develop vaccine or react quickly? Do you wish to accompany propose guidelines to react better? And my second question is totally different. It was related to the fact you say that politics has a big impact, and you now developed a huge project for Bill and Melinda, supported by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but this is a non-governmental organization with a massive power in terms of money. So how do you reconcile and does it make a difference for you being supported by Bill and Melinda Gates compared to being supported by governmental fundings?
Okay, so the first question, I'm a bit ticking on the guideline words because I do believe we need to be flexible, and the guideline you might produce a day might not be adaptable the next day. But the answer is yes for trying to help, trying to understand. I think there are a lot of knowledge. People knows, and actually the smallpox virus and the knowledge about smallpox immunity was quite extended. And I think if we gather these type of knowledge, we can anticipate a bit more. And again, I come back to our research approaches and the way we engage together within the scientist community and also outside. And hopefully, of course, I can't say we will have an impact now because I don't know, I haven't started to do it, but I believe in it. And I think, like you, when you are developing the vaccine, I'm sure the fact we believe in it would make the thing to change.
Can I just add as well? You've raised African swine fever. Great example of what Camille's just been talking about. This is a disease we've known has been problematic in Africa for years. It's something we highlighted in a study that was funded by DFID and run by ILRI in terms of prioritising disease for the poor. Did anybody bother about developing a vaccine when it was in Africa? No. Why? Because it belonged to a poor group of countries. As soon as it escapes from that environment, it suddenly becomes a priority. So it's actually a very nice example of a disease suddenly going up the hierarchy because it's affecting us. Would anybody be really bothered about Ebola if it kept springing up and killing a few people in Congo? No, probably not. It suddenly became an issue when we thought we were going to be affected. So the issue of disease is very much framed around who it affects and whether those people actually have economic power and political power to take things forward. Our choice of partnering with Bill and Melinda Gates is partly born out of the fact that they're supporting the human burden of disease. So they are sponsoring all the work that's done by the Institute of Health Metrics in Seattle, who are doing a lot of work to actually challenge our thoughts about what is the human burden of disease. So you'll notice that rising up the hierarchy within that is the non-communicable diseases, not just the infectious diseases. And there will be things that will emerge if we have better data around animal health issues that we need to be more conscious of. And coming back to Brian's point, how do we intervene? Quite often it's vaccines are missing, diagnostics are missing in the sort of management of disease in society. I think that's something we don't get enough funding for. The earlier talk by Linda indicated a lack of reagents. Well, why are we not highlighting that? Why are we not getting resources for that? We need to highlight these things more carefully to make sure that we can do better science. We can't do that without numbers and economics because that's how decisions are made.
All right, it's gone green. Good job we've known each other for a while because I have to pull you up on something. I mean, we've had African swine fever vaccination programs in place at Pirbright for 15 years, even when it was not a fashionable disease. It's a really difficult virus, really difficult. And even now you cannot see a solution in the short term. The other point.
Did that prioritisation come out of that study? That study was published in 2002. The main work of that was done in 2000. So presumably it was prioritised through that process of actually looking at diseases for the poor. No, not at all.
No, it's. I mean, we've been working on it for longer than that. I mean, you go back to the 90s. It's an important disease. Walter Plowright was most proud of his work he did on African swine fever virus. So now you're going back to the 60s and trying to understand it and the impact it had on the livelihoods of people in Africa. So yeah, it's been difficult to raise the finances for that, but people have been working on this for a long time, but it's just a very difficult virus. And for sure now it's got into Europe, it's accelerated the amount of funding we can get for that. But I think it makes the case for having institutes that have long-term strategic goals to solve these problems and not have to follow fashion, if you like. And in that same vein, we talked about immunological tools. So Roslin Institute and Pirbright Institute have been strategically funded. Then that funding started in April 17 to develop tools for immunological tools for livestock species. A lot of work Gary in particular did a number of years ago. It's a struggle to get the funding for this, but we've made that case. If you don't have the tools, you can't analyse those immune systems properly, and so we've got funding from that. And then that's allowed us to attract other funding into that space as there's long-term strategic commitment to developing those tools. So, you know, there's a lot of work going on, and I think that's why meetings like this are very useful, because the two worlds get to understand what they're doing and what they're trying to achieve. Your world and my world.
But that said, Brian, as you know, in 2002, 2003, the USDA completely canceled the ASF program and cut the funds significantly for all of Plum Island, and the biggest consequence of that was the loss of the ASF program, which is back in place now because of the spread of ASF into Europe. So exactly what Jonathan was saying, I am embarrassed to say the US government behaved that way.
I mean, we all have funding priorities, but yeah, I'm just saying we've kept, you know, we and others have kept that program going for a long time. This thing work? I don't know.
Sorry, just a comment. I just wanted to point out that interaction with socio-economic scientists is not just important for the epidemic diseases, but also for the endemic production diseases, which don't have large outbreaks, where vaccination schedules will never be dictated by governments or large international organizations, but it will be the farmer or the vet who decides whether to vaccinate or not. So there again, we need economics to define farms, to identify farms that would actually benefit from vaccination, and to identify barriers and incentives for the farmers to vaccinate or not. And also there's still a lot of work to be done. But those diseases often stay below the radar, which makes it more difficult to persuade people to collaborate with other scientists in other areas.
Yeah, and just to add on this, I think this is also one of the aim of the global burden of animal disease, where we want these issues to be highlighted and emphasized based on evidence that actually are well constructed. So in which we would have approaches and data that would lead to numbers, but that are good numbers.
I'm wondering if it would be possible to see the last quote that you put up. I think it was the previous slide. Right, so I didn't really understand this in terms of what it's saying. There's quite a lot of information in there, but I guess my kind of thing about it is that it's quite a negative statement. It does not rely on, and I'm not quite sure then, you know, knowledge and so on. Maybe it's the word privileged, but what is the positive way forward? Because even we know in society evidence does not matter to some people, and therefore the decision-making processes. So, you know, really, what is that statement saying, and what would be the positive way forward from that?
There are many positives in this sentence. The idea is it's based on all what I explained before, and the way we as researchers question ourselves and challenge what we are doing and the question we are trying to answer. and the way we assess things. So in this way, I'm talking about privileged knowledge, just to make sure that we don't consider we have, well, whatever the we is, the true knowledge, because this is very relative. And then it's about going to that, engaging. When you engage, you incorporate different views and different opinions, and actually it might make you understand differently what you were thinking, well, like a statement, and it make you perhaps make you rethink what you do, and then lead to solutions that you were thinking impossible to achieve. So this is very positive. It's not to blame anyone.
Okay, I guess it's just it does not, and then there's all this stuff after it, which is why I felt it kind of came across as quite negative. Just I'm going to hand over to Isabel, but I don't know if you or other people are aware of the Vaccine Confidence Project that's run by Heidi Larson at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, the website, but she has done a lot of work in this area, particularly I think recently because of the concerns over the human papillomavirus, or safety concerns, perceptions that people have, and that is one of the most safe human vaccines that's ever been developed because of the amount of regulation that has actually gone into it. It's a new vaccine and it has really gone through a lot of regulatory processes. It's very safe, but there's still a lot of public concern about that, which is then perpetrated through social media. So then this starts to kind of get around, and it's really about then how do you get over that kind of barrier, and that's kind of where I'm kind of coming from with that thing about evidence.
I think the reaction of people today are not only related to what's happening today, but all what happened before. So we might also have huge reaction to a given vaccine because of all the situations publics have faced in the past that has a bit challenged or shaken the trust. And then it's like any type of relationship where you wish to strengthen. So it's very good that this type of vaccine are emerging. And then it's about building trust. It's about communicating. It's about understanding where the fear comes from and trying to tackle this. So no, but again, it's one important thing is this is really crucial, and this is why I'm really interested in history as well, because I think one crucial point we need to always keep in mind is that we are what our experiences have made of us, and it's not only in terms of one life, because this is a human lifetime is quite short. It's about all the rest. We are carrying this with us without realizing it. Our system, our society is built on what our ancestors were doing, and we need to understand that. And understanding that, deciphering this, might help you perhaps to understand why people are so against this type of vaccine.
Just something a little bit different, but you talk in your presentation about the drivers of the veterinary vaccine developments, and even the human one. I was asked recently at the Ag Research meeting that was organized by the EU, what is the main driver of veterinary vaccine development currently? And I'm curious to see what you would answer to that, and what do you think then, to conclude, what would be the ideal drivers? But what is the driver?
So I don't think there is one driver. I think there are drivers, and these are related to all the people that are working in the system of vaccine development. Of course, you have some with more power, so you can focus on them first.
Industry first.
Industry.
Right? Yeah.
You know, so my understanding is, of course, to develop a product, a commercial product, the idea is to sell it. And so one of the drivers would be to identify where the vaccine can increase profit. But then when you think about it, it's interesting to understand how the evaluation of this profit has been made, because what you think is a profit might not be, if your approach to assess this profit has been wrong. So here again, there is a need to understand how people are doing this, including in the industry sphere. And then coming to us as researchers, we are also doing research, and we are depending on funding. And we highlighted it with swine fever, but there are many other examples. And actually what the research we are conducting on within the SAPHIR project might interest you, in this sense that what we clearly can see is what scientists are calling impact is more a justification of means. So it's not a real assessment of impact, but you talk about impact in a way to sell research, to be able to publish, to be able to, and these are very challenging points. But if we are transparent, and if we acknowledge it, and then if we again coming back to how we define questions and how we uncover the way people are acting, we can, I'm sure, overcome these limitations. We can shed light on them.
I think that's a nice conclusion. Well, maybe we can follow up later because of the lunch now. So,